In life, there is usually a starting point for most things that we do. In Peachtree, this would be the company file. In life, in business and accounting, there are also usually phases that we can go through that help us kind of organize and make sure that we set things up correctly. And again, the same is true in Peachtree. What we also know, though, is that regardless of how we get things established, often over time things change, and sometimes we just need to update. We also know that there are some types of transactions that don't just fit into the regular or normal way of doing things. In this chapter, we're going to explore several things. We'll explore how to create and work with the company file, how to set our default preferences, also how to work with something called the general journal, so when we have to do a transaction that doesn't quite fit into some of the other techniques that Peachtree has, we'll still have a way to properly account for them. With all of these things in place, you'll be ready to hit the ground running, as well as know how to update things when you need to, as you need to do them. If you are building your file along with me as I work through this course, you can simply keep that same company file open as we work. If you're just joining in, if you didn't follow all of the steps from the previous chapters, or if you simply want to start each chapter with a fresh file, you need to use a company file from the Project Files folder located on your desktop. Unlike other total training courses, the project files for this course are just a little bit different. Due to the complexity of Peachtree's file and database structure, as well as the number of files for each company, we found that we had to be a little bit more creative or unique for these particular project files. The project files are actually backup files for my working file. They simply need to be restored in order for you to be able to use them. For each chapter, you're going to open Peachtree, go to the File menu, choose Restore, and work through the wizard to choose the backup from the file folder that you're going to be choosing from the desktop. It's a fairly simple process. We do apologize that there are some extra steps beyond what you normally do for this type of training, but it's the best way we could accommodate distributing the materials that we needed to for the course. I'd like to go ahead and demonstrate how this restore process is going to work. I have Peachtree open, and I do not have a company file open. I'll go to the File menu, choose Restore, and this begins the Restore wizard. The first step is to choose your backup file. This is when you want to go to the desktop and choose the appropriate chapter folder from the Project Files folder. I'll start all the way at the top to make this easier to see. I'll go to the desktop, scroll down a little bit, choose my Project Files folder for Peachtree 2009, and then select the chapter folder that I need. There should only be one file that shows. It's going to end in .ptb, which is a Peachtree backup. It's the name of our company we're working with, Irlandessa Spa, followed by an underscore and the chapter number. In this example, Irlandessa Spa _ chapter 4. Go ahead and double-click the file. That'll bring you back to the wizard, and then you can click Next to move to the next step. This is actually a very important step. You need to select the company you wish to restore your backup files to. If you are only working through this course, if you do not have any of your own Peachtree files, you can leave the defaults. But I have to caution you, you do need to absolutely make sure that you're careful where you restore this file to. Because of the way the pervasive database in Peachtree works, it always wants to go back to a default folder. If you accidentally keep it on an existing company, and if you restore it to your default folders, you may overwrite your good company data. So let's go through this very carefully. I would recommend that you always choose a new company, not an existing company. It then is going to fill in the company name and the location from the backup. Remember that if you select to restore to an existing company, that you can browse to the directory and select a company to restore. But if you accidentally choose the wrong company, you could effectively delete your good company data. So again, my recommendation is to select a new company and then click Next. This stage has a couple of checkboxes. You must choose to restore your company data. This is going to be all of the information that you need. In addition, just to make these instructions consistent, I would like you to also select Customized Forms. That particular piece of information won't be important until later chapters in the course, but if you always check both of these boxes, then you'll be okay through the entire thing. If you do not choose company data, what you'll end up with is an empty file with no data in it. Once these are selected, you can click Next. This is going to go ahead and confirm everything that you said you've done. You do want to read it carefully. We're going to be restoring Irlandessa Spa. We can tell the chapter folder that's appropriate that we're going to be restoring from, and the default folder that we're going to be restoring to. Remember that this is going to be the default set by Peachtree, and without having to make you go in and change all of your configuration for Peachtree, this should be the same default location. Let me reiterate again that you do not want to overwrite a company file, so please make sure that you use all of these settings appropriately, and then click Finish. I'm not going to go ahead and restore because I'm currently working through the same company files that we're working with in the course. Once you click Finish, it will take just a few seconds, maybe a minute or so, to convert the file back. Then it will give you a confirmation, and you'll be ready to go. For most of us, things in our lives do change over time, or maybe I should say sometimes they evolve. That might be a better word. But regardless, what we know is we need to update things on occasion, and our company information is no exception to that. When I initially created our company file, I actually didn't worry too much about putting in all of the addresses and phone numbers. At that point in time, I was just trying to get a company file made in Peachtree. But now I want to go back and fill in that information. First of all, so it's there. Secondly, so it's accurate. And thirdly, so the software can actually use that information to produce different types of reports and output. It's actually a very simple thing to do as long as you know where to go, and it's actually from the Maintain menu. So I'll move up and click on Maintain. Come down about, 3/4 of the way or so, and give Company Information a click. Now it may look just a little bit different than it did originally in the Company Wizard, but the basic information is still here. Having your name, your address, city, state, zip, telephone numbers, websites, employer ID numbers, those types of things are a critical part. You'll also notice at the bottom of this dialog that we do have the directory where this file is actually stored. If you ever need to know where a file is, for example, if you need to find it or back it up, recover it, something like that, then this is the place to come to see where that directory is. At the bottom of the dialog, you'll also see that we have the posting method, if we're using direct deposit, if we're using any of Peachtree's managed payroll, and what our accounting method is. The posting, direct deposit, and managed payroll, of course, are options. They have features where we can go in and make choices. But you will notice that our accounting method is grayed out. That's one of those things that we can't change once we've created the company file. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and just make a couple of changes here. I'm going to go ahead and fill in my address, my city, my state, my zip, and see what other things I might want to update while I'm here. Our spa is actually located in New Cummings, Oregon, and the street address is 6754 North Apricot Way. You'll notice that as I work through the city, the state, and the zip, that I actually get drop-downs. And that's something that I think Peachtree does that's a little bit different than other programs. You see it both in Peachtree as well as in ACT that's also created by Sage. What they're doing is creating a lookup. So once you have an address, it's very simple to use that drop-down to update information. In this case, I haven't entered this information before, so I'm just typing into the fields. One of the things I want to caution you about is that the field that comes after city, state, and zip is country with an R and not county. A lot of people confuse this and try to put in the county. They're thinking maybe about taxes that they may have that are county-based. This is actually country, and you can leave it blank unless you're doing international business. The website, fax, email, those types of information are important, but I'm not going to make you watch me type here. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up by just clicking the OK button on the top left of the window. So we can see that we can go in and change that company information at any time. You may need to do that at certain times as your company grows, you move locations, you change phone numbers, all of those types of things that really are just things that happen in life. Not a big deal, and Peachtree certainly doesn't care about those types of simple changes. What is sometimes a little bit more important as it relates to the integrity of our file and our accounting is actually working with some of the global options. For example, we need to set global options for the software and possibly even work with the date that the system is using. To do this, I'm actually going to move from the Maintain menu over to the Options menu, and at this point, I'm just going to choose Global Options. As you would imagine, Global Options is, well, global in nature, so it covers an awful lot of things. We're not going to go over all of the different defaults and things as we work through the samples, but once I show you where things are at, I expect that you will go back in and kind of take a little bit of a look at what's available here on each of the tabs. First of all, for example, we have accounting. Now, it certainly makes sense that we need to set up accounting to work the way that we want for an accounting program. There are some things here that you may never need to change. For example, how decimal entry is done. There are other things that you may want to change. For example, in the middle of this dialog, we have a section called Hide General Ledger Accounts. And people often think, well, defaults are good, which they can be, but what does this really mean? Hiding general ledger accounts means as you're working through Peachtree, are you going to see that double entry bookkeeping and things that's happening in the background, or is Peachtree going to hide that from your view? It's not that you can't access it, it's just whether it will be visible in your default windows. For example, do you want to hide general ledger accounts when you're working with accounts receivable? For example, when you're making quotes and sales orders and invoicing and so forth. The same is true for accounts payable as well as payroll entry. I'm going to go ahead and remove the check mark for accounts receivable. So as I work with those types of transactions in those windows, I will have access to the general ledger accounts so I can keep an eye on what's happening in the background. At the bottom, we have an Other Options section. Other is usually just that miscellaneous that wouldn't fit into one nice category. Things like warn if a record was changed but not saved. Now I actually like that because if I'm changing things and I haven't saved it, I would like to be notified of that. We also have the opportunity to do things like hide inactive records. Remember that Peachtree doesn't allow us to delete anything that has activity behind it, so hiding inactive records is a way to simplify our list. After all, over the course of time, we hope that you keep all of your customers and all of your transactions, but you certainly may have some that haven't been customers for a long time. So do you actually want to see those people or not? I'm thinking that hiding inactive records will be a way to simplify what I'm working with in Peachtree, so I'll go ahead and give that one a click. There are, of course, General tabs, Peachtree Partner tabs, and then the last one is Spelling, and it may not seem like it belongs in an accounting program, but I do want to click on Spelling for just a moment. Fortunately, for those of us who tend to maybe type faster than we can think, if that makes sense, I like to have a spell check, and most programs these days include spelling. Now that's actually a good thing because we can just type things out and it's going to draw our attention by putting what it considers to be misspelled or questionable words in red. Just like you have spelling options in your other basic applications, the same is true here with similar options. For example, do I want to check spelling as I type? Do I want to check spelling each time I save or close? On the right-hand side, you'll also see different options such as ignoring capitalized words, mixed case, words with numbers, all uppercase, internet addresses, which is always a good idea because since those don't have spaces, they are very infrequently considered correctly spelled words. What about doubled words if you type the same word twice? Case-sensitive suggestions might be nice, suggesting splitting words, and do you want to autocorrect misspelled words? Now, a lot of people have opinions about autocorrect. The good news is I don't have to deal with it. It's just going to fix things that I mistype. For example, ADN should be automatically corrected to AND. But, on the other hand, it might be changing words that you intended to spell the way that you did. This kind of depends on your industry and how often you're using industry-specific words, proper names, those types of things. So kind of play with that one a little bit. You can always come in and turn it on if it becomes an issue. My recommendation is probably to leave it off. Maybe most importantly through this whole thing is which dictionary are you using? Believe it or not, there is a difference between, say, American English and British English. So you want to make sure that you're using the correct dictionary. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of misspellings, or it's going to try to convert words to spellings that you're not familiar with. Those are some of the global options that we can address. As I said, there's a lot of information on these tabs, and I recommend that you come in and take a look at each of the tabs individually so you know what's available and you also know what can be modified. I am done with it for the moment, so I'm going to go to the upper right and click OK. Then I want to go back to the Options menu and just show you another option that we have here. We were in Options Global to begin with. Now I want to go to Change System Date. If you recall, our system date shows kind of in the middle top of our Peachtree window, and that lets us know what the current system date is. It's based on our computer date, generally speaking. What I can do here, though, is I can actually change the date. Now, we don't want to do this very often. There needs to be a specific reason why you would do that. But if you ever notice that the system date is incorrect, or if you need to change it for a certain purpose, it's simply a matter of going into the Options menu, making your change here, and then saying OK. I do not want to do that, so I'm going to just cancel out. Back up at the Options menu, just a couple more things to discuss that's here. First of all, if you're having internet connection issues using Peachtree, you can define the internet connection. By default, the system is going to come up and you initially install and say, I think I've configured it the way you need it. Do you want me to go ahead and do that? Usually, yes is the best answer. But if you're having issues, you can go in and define the connection itself. Another nice feature that's either on or off is when you start Peachtree if you want to start with the last open company. That way you don't have to click on the file menu, go to recent files, or navigate through a directory structure. This is usually something that I like to keep on. The last thing in this menu is default information, and it has a flyout with default information for customers, vendors, employees, payroll setup wizard, inventory items, jobs, statements, invoices, and the general ledger. These are things that we're going to be working with throughout the course, and you can access them both through options, default information, or if you go to the maintain menu, you also can see some of these options. While we're talking about default information that may need to be updated every once in a while, I actually want to take a look at my general ledger options. So I just popped over to the maintain menu, primarily just to show you that there's two different places you can access this, from options or maintain. I'm going to move all the way down here to default information. From the flyout, I'll go ahead and choose the general ledger, which is at the very bottom. This actually is one of the simplest dialogues you'll see when you're setting defaults. The general ledger only has one default to be set, and that is something called the rounding account. The rounding account is an account that is used when you show things with rounded numbers. For example, most companies don't want to see the cents when they're doing reporting. They only want to see even dollar amounts. And if you're a large company, you may not even care about individual dollars, tens or hundreds of dollars. Sometimes you're setting those to round to the nearest 1,000, or, dare I say, even the most millions. That would be nice. Maybe that can be one of our goals. The point here is that when you round numbers, Peachtree has to do something with the extra numbers. Now, there was a movie made quite a while ago about this entire thing, about how banks have to round when we have percentages and things that are given, like interest rates. Well, that's a whole different thing. We'll talk about entertainment at a different time. But the rounding account is exactly the same thing. Peachtree, because it follows GAAP, can't simply get rid of it or not show it. It has to do something with it. And this is the account that it uses. The recommended account is retained earnings, and we're not going to get into all of the accounting reasons why that's the best choice, but unless you have a really good reason, and you've been told probably by an accountant to do something different, you just want to make sure that retained earnings is the set account and leave it be. Because I'm not going to change it, I'll just go ahead and say cancel. And we've been able to go in and update some information, as well as ensure that the software is in pretty good shape to work the way I want with general overall settings. If we remember back to our basic accounting 101, we remember that everything that we do in accounting actually goes in and affects the general ledger or the general journal. You can refer to it both ways. What we also have to remember, though, is that you shouldn't need to make general journal entries that often in Peachtree. Usually there's another, and dare I say, even better way. That's what Peachtree works so hard to do for us, to keep the accounting behind the scenes and let us focus on tasks instead. So what do we need to know about the general ledger or the general journal, abbreviated GL? Well, first of all, as I said, use another Peachtree option if it exists, and usually it does. Also remember the bookkeeping part, which is that all entries must be in balance, credits and debits. Normally, we make one entry in Peachtree, and the double entry bookkeeping happens behind the scenes. But when you work with the GL, you have to do both sides of the equation. Peachtree will not allow a transaction that is out of balance. That, again, is our accounting 101. So you're going to have to make it balance before you're able to save a GL entry. As a standard, the debit is entered first, and the credit is entered second for both sides of that equation. Now, there's no hard and fast rule that says it's the only way it works. Actually, if you do it the opposite way, it works just fine. But accountants and other professionals are used to seeing the debit entry first. So you pretty much want to conform to standards if you can. You may also need to enter multiple debits to offset one credit, or vice versa. In other words, it's not necessarily just one and two transactions. Sometimes you have multiple layers on one side or the other. If you recall a sample that we did a little bit earlier with the real world in accounting, we had a couple of entries that we had to use for a sale, because part of it was paid in cash, but part of it was still left in accounts receivable. That's a good example of having two parts of the transaction on the left side of the equation and one on the right. An example of something that we might need to do in the general ledger might be an end-of-year adjustment. Maybe we've sent our file off to our accountant, they found that something is just a little out of whack, and it's easier to make an adjustment in the GL rather than trying to undo or redo different types of transactions. So what's happening with the GL behind the scenes? Well, we usually use transaction windows, not the GL. Remember, that's our standpoint. The GL is always working in the background. If you choose to hide the GL accounts in the global options, they don't show in those transaction windows. I have gone ahead and turned that option off so that I am going to see the GL accounts as I work. It's a personal preference. I just like to keep an eye on what's going on. Maybe you could call it a control thing, but either way, you do have the option through global options to turn that on or off. In many of your transaction windows, you will have the option to click the journal button so that you can see that within the transaction window. And you can make changes to the GL, but don't unless you're advised to do so or you're very sure what you're doing. A lot of people think they know enough about accounting to go in and make things like end-of-year adjustments on their own or get some things to zero out. That's not the best way to do it usually. It's not the appropriate accounting way, but if it is, then an accountant will probably be the one to tell you how to do it. I can't tell you exactly what to do, but that is my strong recommendation. Many people have really messed up their books by going in and making things change in the GL when it really should have been done a different way or not done at all. Beyond my little warning, or maybe I should say I don't mean to scare you completely, but maybe just enough that you don't do something silly, we might want to make a GL entry. And that's what I've decided that I need to do for my particular Peachtree file. Let's say that we just had a $5,000 investment by one of our owners. Now that's not normal income. If I tried to claim it as income so that I could put it into a bank account, it's going to be shown just as that, as income, and that's not accurate. It's not a sale that we made. That also can cause other problems because usually I need to pay taxes on income, and that may not be fair because the $5,000 really wasn't a sale, it was instead an investment. So you can see all the different reasons why we need to make sure that we account for things correctly and not just kind of stick them in using something that might work or looks like it gets a bank account balance right but isn't really proper accounting. With that little warning, let's go ahead and make a general journal entry. I'm going to do this from the Tasks menu, which is where we're going to access most of the work that we do in Peachtree. I'll go ahead and go to Tasks and then come down almost all the way to the bottom and choose General Journal Entry. When the transaction window comes up, we can see that this is very basic. It looks kind of like a check register. Because this is a new account and we don't have any entries yet, of course it's a blank register. At the top, we can see that there's a place for a date as well as a reference. Now, one of the things you should always do, in my opinion, is put in a reference for these types of entries because they are kind of generic or mixed, if you will. They could be lots of different things. So come up with some kind of a naming scheme that might work. One easy way to do it is just to use the letters GL for General Ledger and then some kind of number, usually the date. I'm going to go ahead and enter a transaction for the 26th of August and give it a reference number. That's fairly easy to do by just typing in over the date. And you can either click with your mouse or you can press Tab. You'll see that it does convert the date when I type it in using the proper formatting so it can recognize what the month, day, and year is. Now I'll put in that reference number. As they say, that's actually the easy part. Now I need to go ahead and work with that transaction. Just a reminder, and I don't mean to repeat myself too much, but this is so important that we have to make sure we do it correctly. All of your GL entries or transactions are going to have two sides to them. You're going to have a credit and a debit, and you may need to do multiple entries. So how does that work with our $5,000 investment by our owner? Well, let's think about that just a second. What we're going to do is get an increase in money that's available to the company. So our cash is going to increase by $5,000. That's coming from owner equity, so the owner equity is also going to be increased by $5,000. In journal speak, that means the cash account will get a $5,000 debit and the owner's equity will get a $5,000 credit. And we need to enter both of those with the debit first because that's the standard in accounting. So I can go ahead and select a GL account. You can use the drop downs. Little magnifying glass will get that to you, or you can type in the account number if you happen to know it. I'm going to go ahead and type in 10,200. When you make a typographical error, it's easy to pick up because your drop down doesn't scroll appropriately. Let me go back with my left arrow key and make the correction. And then as soon as I enter a correct account number, it should be highlighted. In this case, it's my regular checking account, and that's exactly what I wanted. Now I can go ahead and finish the transaction. The next thing I need to do is a description. And this should be just that, a good, strong description for both sides of the equation. I think I'll put in that this was an owner contribution by Jeff Salazar. The reason I want to make sure that that's very descriptive for both sides is that when I press Tab, that's automatically going to get copied down to the next part of my transaction. If I make it good, I don't have to retype it. Here's where we have to put in the money. This is the debit, of course, and if you're doing it in the right order, remember this should always be the first one, so you don't have to worry about what the debit and credit are. This was simply a single $5,000 contribution, so I'll put in the $5,000, and I'll tab on through to my next line. Notice as soon as I move off of the first line, that's when it copies down the description for the second half of my transaction. The second account that I need to credit is going to be my member contributions, which is $39,006. I don't necessarily expect you to be able to remember these account numbers. I just happen to know them, and to save time, it's easier to type them in if you do know them than to scroll through those very extensive lists. Once again, I don't necessarily need to change the description, so I'll tab on through it. This is the credit portion of my transaction, so I'll leave debit blank and enter $5,000 in credit. It's very important that when I think I'm done, I move to the bottom right side of the box, because this is going to tell me what my totals are. $5,000 in debits, $5,000 in credits. I am not out of balance by any, which is what was required. So now I can simply move up to the top, save my transaction, and then close the window. By doing this fairly simple and straightforward journal entry, I have been able to give us a $5,000 credit to the company, correctly accounting where it came from and the fact that it went into our checking account, not trying to make things work or pigeonhole it into a way that doesn't. This is the way proper accounting works, and it's absolutely critical to make sure that your files are accurate and that you don't pay things like taxes on stuff that really wasn't income, which I think everybody wants. In addition, we were able to set up the company file with all of our good information so it will print out on those reports, as well as set some defaults like the system dates and our GL preferences so that it's all going to work the way that we need to and everything's smooth sailing from here on out.